Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the folks who commented and participated in the meeting. Something that I've been thinking about today and something I was planning on doing and now feel will be all the more appropriate is to make a formal request of the police department for police reports, all the police reports regarding all the arrests last night. And that would be something that we would like to review. I've heard a couple of comments about last night prior to this meeting. I was present for part of the evening in front of Knight Memorial Library. I didn't personally see anything that I would make a complaint about, but I have heard comments from different people, and I appreciate the people who spoke today. And so tomorrow, I will be submitting that request to the police department so that we can have an opportunity to review any and all police reports related to the arrest from last night, so that we can have the opportunity to review those. I wanted to take an opportunity on agenda item number 2 and provide an update on at least the PERA side or the PERA perspective on what is taking place. Obviously, it's a very tragic situation, and we're all outside of the many complicated components that exist. There's at least one simple component, and that is that we all wish for the speedy and complete recovery of Mr. Jamal Gonzalez. It's obviously a very tragic situation, and I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's a human being in the middle of all of this and that we all can unite in wishing the best for him. As far as the PERA's perspective, I wanted to be clear. I have communicated with the board everything that I've done so far, and so I want to communicate the same to the public. As early as Monday morning, very early Monday morning, I had a brief conversation with the Chief of Police, Chief Clements, expressing that PERA wants to exercise its role. And specifically, I want to talk about the statute, the PERA ordinance, and I want to be clear about what it is that PERA can do and what PERA can't do. Under H2, subsection H2 of the PERA ordinance, we have the authority to, quote unquote, monitor any internal investigation taking place at the police department. We do not have, neither under the ordinance nor under our capacity of resources, the ability to conduct an independent investigation of our own. What that means is, for example, if there is need to get something DNA tested or to test a blood sample or something really specific like that, we obviously don't have the capacity to do that. And so what we're trying to do is to maximize our ability to review what's happening. In the past, as recently as this summer, what has happened when we've exercised this subsection of the statute is that the city and the police department has interpreted that part of the statute to mean that we can simply review documents when the police department chooses, how the police department chooses, and they ultimately have the discretion what to show us and what to not show us. I have pushed back against that interpretation since the very beginning of my tenure as executive director. I have concern, and I've expressed to the police department and to the mayor and to the city council that I don't believe there should be any daylight in between what the city knows, what the mayor knows, what the police know, and what we know. In the past, and up until now, there has been daylight, obviously. The police department has given us some opportunities to review documents and videos and other investigations. And the reality is that this is a very high profile investigation. And so I am, as far as concrete update, I had been in conversation with the police department about setting up an initial briefing. We have not, I've had a couple of conversations with the police department about this case. And they've agreed to give us a briefing. And so we're in the process of scheduling that. I want to schedule it sooner rather than later. Part of that analysis is including our investigator in that, which I think is very important, and continuing to invest in our investigator because we're gonna need it, especially if we're gonna look into this case as seriously as it needs to be looked. If we're gonna look into the arrest that happened, we're gonna need to invest in investigative services. And so what is clear? Right now, we are in the process of scheduling an initial briefing. What I am getting resistance from on the city and police department is that they want to show us things after the fact. We have not been, the public will note, we have not been part of either of the 2 press conferences that have taken place so far. I think that we should have been. I think that we should have had conversations with the mayor and the attorney general, and I want us to be exactly on the same page. And the point that I've made to them, the point that I'll make publicly, is that there needs to be the civilian perspective at this table. And I'm not just saying that in a general sense. I'm not just saying that because I like how it sounds or because it's convenient. I'm saying that because in my tenure as executive director, I've seen, and we have seen, what the civilian perspective brings to the table. Oftentimes when you have folks either in the legal community or the law enforcement community look at something, they're going to come up with one perspective. The civilian perspective is different. For example, you might look at key words like use of force or reasonable or probable, and the law enforcement community is going to look at it one way, and the civilian community is going to look at it another way. And again, that's not a theoretical point that I'm making. We have seen that concretely. The last high-profile investigation to take place, the investigation into the incident that took place on April 19, featuring Sergeant Handley, we just published our report, I think 2 weeks ago, and you can see that there are differences, notable differences between the information that was given to the public and the information that we thought was relevant through the review done by our investigator. And so I have expressed to the police department that having the opportunity to review documents after the fact or based upon the discretion of the police department, that's not good enough. Not in this case. This is obviously very serious. We all believe in due process, where none of us are saying that nobody on this board, neither staff nor board member, is out here jumping to conclusions or making assumptions about things, but we need to be a part of the process. I've expressed to the mayor that I want to be at the table receiving information in real time. The same way, I listened very closely to the press conference from this morning, and we share the mayor's sentiment. We want to have an investigation that's complete, that is transparent, that is professional. And in order to do that, the civilian perspective needs to be at that table, and that's why PERA was created. And so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I want to try to be as clear and as transparent as possible on what has happened and what I believe should happen. And so I'm encouraged that the police department seems ready, willing, and able to schedule an initial briefing with us. However, going forward, especially because some of the comments have been that this investigation is going to take weeks and months, going forward, I want to ensure that we settle for nothing less than being at the table, getting information in real time, because that is the role of this board. Obviously, the public is very engaged in this incident, very concerned about this incident, and I want to make sure that this board is able to execute its responsibility under city law and to the community. And so that is my update, again, with regard to what we are doing in this case. I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts from board members. I've certainly shared all that information and look forward to hearing your thoughts or recommendations on the same.
Public safety regarding briefing. Will this be a briefing to the full board, or how will it play out?
We can schedule it for the full board. If we do that, we'd obviously have to comply with open meetings laws and make sure that there's notice and everything like that. In fact, I had not thought about that until now.
Yeah.
What I had been initially discussing with the police department was scheduling something where at least, on the police department, we'd be speaking to Chief Clements and Commissioner Perry, and on our side, obviously myself and the executive committee, and any board members that were available. But thinking back, and now that you said that, I think the more appropriate course of action would be to set up a briefing similar to we did in early August for the Handy case, and do it that way. I think that might be more appropriate. So I'm glad you brought that up. And if folks are in agreement with that, I'm happy to kind of shift the conversation taking place now to, instead of doing a smaller briefing in person, we could probably set up a meeting like this. It likely have to take place in executive session due to the fact that it's an ongoing investigation, but I'm happy to coordinate that. And up until that point, we have agreement as to what should happen. What should happen thereafter, I think we're not necessarily on the same page, at least in my opinion. But up until that point, we have agreement. And so I'm looking forward to scheduling that and giving the board an opportunity to look into the facts of this case.
So I do have a question about, you said that the matter is under investigation. Is this matter under criminal investigation?
I mean, I don't want to speak specifically to that just because I haven't been told that. My assumption is that if the Attorney General is involved, that's at least one of the components that he might be looking at, but that's just strictly my thinking out loud. I don't have any information about that.
And the reason I ask that is because if it's not a criminal investigation, then we should have this conversation in an open meeting.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is something I alluded to, but I just want to be clear about. At this moment, I had asked Eugene to pause, essentially. He had been looking into the initial 12 complaints that we had voted into investigation. But due to the fact that we were having a conversation as to whether to continue funding investigations, I asked Eugene to pause because it doesn't make sense to ask somebody to do work that we're not sure he's going to get paid for. And so I would urge the board to not only to continue funding Eugene and his work, especially the amount of work we have to do now, but I would recommend, similar to what we did in the last fiscal year, to take that step and ask the Board of Contract and Supply to fund investigations to the tune of $50,000, $50,000, just so that we can operate with the confidence of knowing that we can continue to fund this. We have the money. Our budget, we're using the same budget as last fiscal year, which was $300,000. Of that, about 1/3 we know we're going to spend, and so we have the ability to do that. I would urge the board to, again, invest in investigative services, especially because there's been no moment where we need it more than right now.
Thank you. We can certainly pick up that conversation next week.
Hi, Sherman Figueroa, this is Panita. I was reading in the news today that the state police was also involved. Is that true, Nick and Jose? Is it also the AG and the state police is also involved in this investigation?
Yes, and I would go one step further. I've heard in the press conferences that the city has invited the Federal Department of Justice to be involved in this case as well. And so there's at least 3 bodies that are being involved to provide some sort of independence. The point that I've made to the mayor is that I'm glad to see that. However, all 3 of these bodies are law enforcement bodies, and it is important. The same way that you want to have that partnership and those allies come in to set, I think the quote was, an extra set of independent eyes, the civilian perspective needs to be equal and at that table as well to be able to provide our independent set of eyes too.